Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Animal Heartbeat, your veterinary cardiology podcast. I'm Jose and and I'm here with my buddy and co-host, Kieran Bourget. We will be talking today about HCM screening in cats. How cool is that, Kieran? Probably the best topic ever.
It's fantastic. And even for those out there who are not geeks about feline echo, like Jose and I are, this should be a super interesting topic because it's fundamental, isn't it? Knowing which animals are affected by a disease and which animals are not affected. I dare say that there might be people who listen to this or who hear about this podcast who think there's a lot of controversy in this area. And I don't think they'd be wrong, would they? That there's lots of different opinions on screening for HCM in cats.
Absolutely. I think it would be a great topic. And to talk to us about this topic today, we have a great guest, Professor Jens Häggström. Jens is a professor of internal medicine at the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine and Animal Science at the University of Uppsala, Sweden. Jens has published many milestone papers, especially in myxomatous mitral valve disease and feline HCM. And he has also led some of the most important clinical trials in veterinary cardiology. So we are truly excited to have Jens with us today. Welcome, Jens.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Jens, it's fantastic to have you here. Why might people consider screening for hypertrophic cardiomyopathy in cats to be a controversial topic?
I think there are many reasons for that. I think it has to do partly with the exam. It has to do with the disease as such. With the classification of the disease we have and the controversy, what is normal, what is abnormal. There is a lot of things to be discussed. And as it is for me, before we started breed screenings, I was one of the persons who started the PawPeds screening programs, and this was the late 1990s. And the story was that before that, why do you echo cats? Someone thought there could be potentially heart disease in that particular cat. We didn't look at normal cats unless there was a study going on. But then we had this Maine Coon breeder who came. She came with 10 cats, and all of them had been diagnosed with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, and she was very upset and angry. And so she asked me for a second opinion, and I said, yeah, well, come, we have a look. And I screened through her cats, and I thought, okay, I agree with the diagnosis in some, but not in all cats. And when we were done, she said, do you want to do a screening program? Because at that time point, Mark Kittelson and co-workers had published a paper about that hypertrophic cardiomyopathy is inherited as autosomal dominant trait in Maine Coon cats. So I thought this is not going to go anywhere. It's easy to do a protocol. She asked me to do a protocol, and she said, I will do the online services. So we started screening Maine Coon cats in Sweden, and then it went over to other cat breeds, and it went over to other countries. And then all of a sudden we started screening cats that were or at least, apparently normal, that cats that were intended to use for breeding. And it went on to be, to my knowledge, the largest database there is in the world of purebred cats with complete echoes.
That's an amazing resource, isn't it?
So then all of a sudden we started looking at completely or supposedly normal cats.
Right.
And for me, personally, I went from going where I said I was, we echoed cats that had a suspicion of heart disease, until looking at cats where there was no suspicion of heart disease. And as things went on, I started realizing that we had been overdiagnosing badly. Things that we thought was completely, this is disease. All of a sudden you realize you find these findings in cats that never did develop any type of disease over time.
Right.
And so normality shifted. And I think that's the learning curve for people that do lots of breed screen, is that you become humble for the variation we see in cats. and you shift your threshold or the way you evaluate the echoes based on that. I have become a much humble person thanks to the cats.
But
it's just one of the many ways cats do that to us,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. But it's so challenging, isn't it? Because it's a disease with so much heterogeneity in phenotype and so on. So it's truly challenging. If we start discussing exactly that, so echocardiographic assessment in cats and all the different factors that may affect our diagnosis. So every listener will know that we define hypertrophic cardiomyopathy based on wall thickness. So HCM is defined as an increased wall thickness in the presence of normal loading conditions and no other systemic diseases that can cause thick walls. But then there are many factors that may affect wall thickness. We should start with a bang and go straight to the big one, which will be the effect of body weight. So Jens published a ginormous study on more than 19,000 cats. It's probably the biggest study, no?
I think it's the biggest veterinary study ever, right? Surely.
Yeah. I don't want to see our spreadsheet. I cannot imagine. A spreadsheet with more than 19,000 cats that came from the PawPeds database that Jens described. And there, Jens, you and your co-workers show that body weight has a clinically relevant affects wall thickness. Can you tell us a bit more about that? Because I guess in the past, people believe, okay, most cats' body weight is not that wide, the range is not that wide, so people are not considering body weight. Can you tell us more about that? What did your study show and how did that affect your practice?
I guess it showed that cats is a mammal. They are mammals. And mammals behave the same way. I mean, it is a non-linear relationship between body weight and if you, depending on what kind of measurement you have, if you have a dimension, that's only a one-dimensional measurement, and if you got area, that's a two-dimensional measurement, and if you got a volume, that's a three-dimensional measurement. And we actually did the same thing as was done in the Cornell paper that was done in dogs, and it's based simply on the principle of allometric scaling. That typically when we estimate the size of the animal by putting the cat on a scale and we measure body weight. Body weight is an indirect measurement of mass of water, because the mammalian body consists mostly of water, which means the mass the animal has is a proportion of the volume of water, and a mass of water has a volume. So therefore, it makes sense then if you measure a one-dimensional measurement, which thickness is, it's just a distance, it would be proportional to roughly the cubic root of the body weight, because body weight is indirectly a measurement of body water, and that has three dimension because it's a volume. So when you look at it, the theoretical scaling exponents, basically what power you raise the body weight, is theoretically 1/3. And the more data we get on the cats, I'm actually working on about to publish another study right now, which is an extension of the previous paper you mentioned, and this one contains almost 60,000 cats, and the more data we have, the closer the scaling exponent comes to the theoretical value 1/3.
And is this across different breeds, Jens?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. This is actually a key question that this paper will deal with, is the influence of breed, sex, neutering status, and those things. And you would think then that breed is a major determinant, and in fact it is not.
Wow.
When you account for body size using the scaling exponents and the prediction intervals, you will see then that majority of cats, the median value that they deviate from the expected value based on the body weight on the prediction formulas is less than 5% for most of the cat breeds. The only breed that stands out and has a deviation more between 5 and 10% are the Sphinx cats.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So breed accounts for less than 10% of the variation for most of the variables we're looking at.
Wow. Yeah, some years ago, I remember Virginia and I and one of her PhD students, Lois, were looking at different breeds of cat, and we each of us had data on some different breeds, but very small numbers compared to what you're talking about. You know, so obviously much less powerful to identify the reality. But from what we could see there, we wondered if there were different lines of regression for different breeds, so different slopes for different breeds with body weight. So ragdolls being different to Norwegian forests, being different to sphinxes, being different to domestic short hairs. But I guess that's an effective sample size. We had, I don't know, 30 cats, 60 cats, you know, in each breed. And of course, that's nothing compared to the size of the data that you've got there.
As Kieran was saying, we were convinced that maybe there was a difference with breeds. Regarding body weight, Jens, if we deal with like the typical weight range, let's say if we deal with cats between 3 and 6 kilos, should we worry with the effect of body weight within that weight range? Because looking at your first paper, I guess most of those cats, the upper 95% prediction intervals were something between 4.5 and 5.2 millimeters, something like that. So what people would consider normal in a cat. So my question is, should we look at body weight whenever in every echo that we do in cats, or more at the extremes, more in small cats versus big cats?
I think body weight becomes more of an issue, as you say, in the extremes, very small cats or very large cats. In the weight range, you are talking now typically, say, between 3.5, maybe up to 5.5 kilo. It's not that much difference because you're only 2 kilos away from each other. So there it is of less importance. I agree with that. Therefore, you're not punishing the big cats too much, and you're not being too lenient on the small cats within that narrow range. But as soon as you start coming away from that, it becomes more of an issue. Then I think that, you know, you hear yourself talking that you're saying that, okay, you know, there should be different, you know, normal reference ranges for different breeds. Well, I say the way, when I look at the database, the difference are so small between the different lines, the predictions lines between different breeds. So clinically, the difference you see is not relevant. It's so small, so it drowns in all the other variation we see and other sources of variation.
Like our own measurement factors, day-to-day variation in our own measurement.
Yeah, sure. The beauty with looking at this enormous database is that it takes into account, and that's something I really like, is that I want screening methods and what we do to be something useful in the hands of many. And from what I can see in the database, there is a lot of work we can do to, even when it comes to comparably simple measurements, to make us measure the same way, do the exams pretty much the same way, because the most important variation we see is actually inter-observer variation.
Okay.
I can almost see in the database who has trained with whom. I can see in the database, and I mean, sometimes it's almost ridiculous. And so there, I think that source of variation is much of greater importance than it comes to the variation we see of cat breeds and we see of sex and other things. So there's a lot of things to be done there. And as I said, many times when reference intervals are being made or created, they're created by a few people, or maybe one or a few people that work in the same place, that are doing the exams exactly the same way. They talk to each other and they really tune in to exactly, so they do the same. But that if you go to another place and ask some other people to do the same, they're not doing the same. And that is, I think that's the challenge with a challenging exam like echoing a cat, that becomes even more important, as I would say, than it comes to doing an echo exam in dogs. So there's a lot of work, I think, that we can do to make the exams better and improving the quality. But in the database, what you get there is that all the sources of variation is superimposed on each other. Inter-observed variation, inter-observed variation, variation because of different ultrasound systems and breed, and everything is on top of everything. So you may regard it, even if it's a database, it's the worst of the worst situation. That's what I like, because you have all sources of variation. You're not excluding any source of variation. Everything is in there.
But thereby, we're making it much more relevant to reality.
It's in the hands of many. It should be valid in the hands of many, not in the hands of few.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
How do you take that into consideration? Because so the inter-observer variability, how do you take that into consideration when you define prediction intervals? Because the prediction intervals will be wider. It's a real world situation, as you were saying, and that's amazing. You have many different observers and so on that will be more easy to extrapolate than when it's done in a single center and so on. But you are a statistics machine. So I would love, I'd love to understand from you, when you do your prediction intervals. Of course, many observers will mean that the prediction intervals are wider. Is that worrisome or not really? Or does that variation is diluted when you have very, very big numbers?
No, but the thing is, one of the critics that came up when we published this in a few years ago was that, but because you got all the sources of variation, so the prediction intervals becomes wider compared to the old ones. In fact, that wasn't true. As a matter of fact, the prediction intervals was smaller. It was a more narrow range, and the ones we're about to publish now is even more narrow. And one of the reasons for that is that there is a law that's called the law of high numbers, large numbers, and it's been known since the medieval times, and it's the basis of all the gambling business. For instance, if you go to the casino and you play roulette, correct me if I'm wrong now, but I think you have 36 numbers that you can place your bet on. And then you got 2 green slots where the bank wins. It's 0 and 00, I think it is. And you would think that for every time you roll the ball, there's always a chance that the ball will land in a slot for the bank, 2 out of 36. So the chance is 1 in 18 that the bank will win. So every time you roll the ball, there's 1/18th chance that the bank will win. So of course, many cases it will be on another number, so somebody would win. But if you roll the ball enough number of times, it will converge exactly to the chance that the bank will win 1 out of 18 times, and that's enough for the bank to never lose money. I mean, that's the principle of gambling. The bank never loses. Can lose once, can lose twice, but they never loses in the long run. So it's been known since medieval time, and it's the same thing here. The more exams you have, the more data you throw into it, the more attempts you have, more or less, to reach the true number, if there is a true number. And that also counts also for some of the variation is a little bit different, because that depends on how much distribution you have around the true value. So it's basically the principle of large numbers. It's not rocket science. It's just statistics and probability.
More data is better data.
So for me, I think predicted value is an important thing, but the distribution and that, to make the prediction intervals is based on the distribution, and the width of the distribution, that is, to me, maybe something that is more of interest than the actual true number, or the theoretically true number.
And how much effect do you think obesity and body condition score has on left ventricular wall thickness in cats? Because obviously that would throw out our body weight, because it's no longer lean body weight.
Yeah, of course it will. I mean, if you have a grossly obese cat, if you use body weight as your way of estimating how big the cat is, I mean, of course, that's going to be invalid. So what we instruct people to do is to make an estimation. If you have an obese cat, which is unlikely, remember that these are purebred cats that breeders are spending money on.
Right.
So they're not going to turn up to a cat show with a obese cat. It is highly unlikely, but it happens. So then what you do then is that you should basically try to estimate a little bit, what would this cat weigh if it was normally, non-obese? And the same thing is true if it is lean or a cachectic cat. How much would it weigh roughly if it was normally, normal body condition?
Sure.
So of course you have to take that into a stream, but as long as you use body weight as your measurement of how big the cat is, then you have that problem. You can't get around it. It doesn't matter what type of measurement you're doing. As soon as you're away from the normality, then you have to make some sort of adjustment there.
Do you think that obesity per se, just obesity, just the fact of being overweight and obese, will affect wall thickness independently of body weight? Because there's conflicting data in the veterinary literature. Some studies showing that obesity measured by body condition score may affect wall thickness, others have not, but we are talking about small numbers. But I believe in humans it has been shown that obesity will affect wall thickness independently of blood pressure and so on. Do you have a feeling or data in cats where on that is obesity, being obese, having too much fat tissue, may affect wall thickness independently of body weight?
To be honest, what I've seen so far, remember that this database doesn't include the extreme fat cats that come. They will be more like cases you see at the clinic. But from what I've seen in the database so far, because we started recording body condition score about, I think we changed the protocol, maybe could be like between 5 and 10 years ago. And it matters quite a little if you make an estimation of what the cat would be weighing if it was normally weighing, compared to other things. So said, for me, this is not I don't think it's a major contributor. How much? I don't have data on that. We have data on we can estimate the impact on many other things, but that one I do not really have the strong data to support one way or the other. But the indication I've seen in the data we have is that it matters if you make an adjustment of how much this cat will be weighing if it was normally weighing. It matters not that much compared to the other sources.
Right.
Variation we see.
Yeah, interesting. Because again, the recent work, I can't remember where it's published from now. I think Liverpool team are involved because they have an obesity clinic. Cats who were echoed when they were obese, and then when they normalized or improved their body condition score, their wall thickness reduced. And I think there's data out there in the wind that was maybe never published from the Royal Canin cats that showed a similar thing. Cats who started out a normal body condition had normal wall thickness, and then it increased when they became obese, and then it reduced when they went down to a normal body weight. Again, we can't tease that out from body weight. It's impossible to do that given the data that we've got, isn't it? But it's it's super interesting.
One way to do it would actually be not to use body weight as your comparison. There are other ways of estimating body size, and one of them could be femur length. There are other things that you can use for scaling, has been used in other species then. But as long as you're using body weight, you have the problem with body weight because that's a variable you're changing, and so.
I guess you'd have to do something to look at body fat content, like electrical impedance or something like that. I mean, I don't know what the accuracy of those things are in cats, but I imagine someone, if it's not validated, would love to validate it. But that would be an interesting study, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
Just going one step back, Jens, because you mentioned sex as a variable that will affect wall thickness and so on. And something that is very interesting is, as you mentioned, the disease is or it has been shown to be transmitted as an autosomal dominant pattern with variable penetrance. So one would not expect males to be overrepresented in HCM, and males are classically overrepresented in human and cat studies when we don't have a sex-linked mutation. Can you elaborate on that? Do you have any theories of why males may be overrepresented in HCM studies? Why do males seem to be more frequently affected by HCM than females?
I really don't have any answer to that, more than my own. I guess my own or other has also expressed similar thoughts. Also, first of all, sex accounts for less than 5% of the variation we see in echo measurements. They have slightly thicker walls, but clinically irrelevant difference if you look at the large data we have. So there is an impact of sex also on echo measurements. But as I've seen, almost every disease we see in dogs and cats, this does also include dogs, is that they tend to develop disease at an earlier age than females would do. It doesn't matter if it's mitral valve disease, if it's dilated cardiomyopathy, seems to be the case in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And because they develop the disease at an earlier age, it means that the prevalence at a given age will be higher in males than it is in females. So it's very similar to myxomatous mitral valve disease, has been shown many years ago. And why do they develop the disease at an earlier age? I really don't have any good explanations for that. Maybe it has to do with that for some reasons, because of the sex, they put more stress on the circulatory system. They are maybe more subjective to more physical movement, or maybe more aggression, or maybe I don't know, something associated with the male phenotype that in the long run causes a weakness, which most of these diseases is a genetical weakness to become apparent at an earlier age than for females. But I don't have any good answers at all when it comes to this. It's just that it seems to be consistent over many different, mammalian species, is that for most diseases, except for the ones that are sex-linked, as you mentioned, there seems to be an earlier development in males than in females.
Let's think about some specifics about how you measure. Are there any pitfalls of measurement for screening purposes where you think, I wouldn't measure in this particular scenario for wall thickness or chamber size because it's likely to be abnormal in a cat who does not have cardiomyopathy? So the example that springs to mind for me would be things like papillary muscles, false tendons. Tell us a little bit about your approach to those in the cat whose heart is only the size of a boiled egg.
I think that's it's a brilliant point to bring up when you dig into the measurements. I think that's one of the biggest sources of errors when you scan cats, and it's not only breed screening cats, doing echoes in cats in general. It's the problem with papillary muscles and false tendon, which I'd rather call left ventricular bands instead, because we have there's a study we are working on right now that shows that they are not the same in composition as the chordae tendineae, which consists only of connective tissue and such collagen and such stuff. The bands or the false tendons, they actually contain myocytes as well, which means they have the potential of contracting and they have the potential of propagating the depolarization. So, which is kind of interesting. Why are they there in so commonly? Because they exist in every cat, and it's just that when you scan them, maybe you're not in the right plane to see them. But according to this study, that consists almost about 100 cats, all of them had it. And the same thing is true with what we call ectopic papillary muscles. I'm not sure exactly what they are, but for sure, when you look at the histology of these structures, there is no sign of excess fibrosis. There's no signs of myocardial or myocyte hypertrophy or myocyte disarray. So in my opinion, and this is also what we recommend to screeners, is that when you do your measurements, first of all, you need to have an ecosystem that has the capacity of imaging the feline heart properly. So that means having a high frequency transducer, having a system that creates images that you actually can see these structures. Because many times when you have maybe an ultrasound system that is not high quality, and as it was when I started, I started with mechanical sector scanners, which was basically it was a mechanical thing that oscillated inside a metal ball, a glass ball like this.
I remember feeling the vibration of those scanners. I had
you
one
felt
of
the
those
vibrations, and we thought we got like a very tiny image, and we thought we saw things crystal clear, and we didn't. We overdiagnosed badly because false standard blended in with the endocardial wall. We didn't see the papillary muscle. Everything looked thick. But with better resolutions, we see better now. So that's the important thing. But going back to the false tendons or left ventricular bands and the papillary muscles, I think they should not be included in the measurements because of reasons, as I said. I mean, when we measure wall thickness in the lateral wall, we do not include the big papillary muscles. They are not included in the measurement because if you do that, the lateral wall would be quite thick. We usually measure in between them. And we also have the problem also of papillary muscles that exist on the right side as well when we measure wall thickness. Do we include them or not include them? Well, in my opinion, and what we recommend is that try not to include if you have something that looks like a papillary muscle on the right side or on the left side. And when it comes to cats, I think a particular problem with these false tendons or left ventricular bands and the papillary muscles are the ones that are situated in the left ventricular outflow tract. Because as you know, it's comparably common particularly in older cats that they have some degree of left ventricular outflow tract obstruction because there's a papillary muscle. You can see the left ventricular bands or the false tendons attaching to this structure. So how do you classify them? Do you include them in the measurement or not? In my opinion, I don't think that they should be included in the measurement because they are extra tissue that, to my knowledge, is not associated with the histopath changes we associate with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Maybe somebody will come up with a new finding. I know that Gerhard West's group in Munich has followed cats over time to see what happens with these structures. And what they could figure out was that nothing happens really with them. They're there, and they are there from when they start looking at the cats until they stop looking at the cats for a matter of over many, many years.
And I think if we can associate our echo with outcome, that's a big deal, isn't it? I love what you're talking about, where you're looking at structures on echo and then actually looking at pathology and saying, well, there's no disarray, there's no fibrosis. This is disarray and fibrosis are HCM, so this is not HCM. But outcome would be another way to do that, wouldn't it? That's super interesting.
Yeah. So these left ventricular bands that I like to call them instead of false tendons, because false tendons implies that they are the same as chordae tendineae.
Let's start the campaign today. Abolish the false tendon. It's like the word moderator band, left ventricular moderator band. That went out the window. We changed to false tendon. Let's abolish false tendon too. We're going to move on.
Yeah, we're going to move on. These bands, left ventricular bands, the problem with them is that, as you all know, is that there is an entity or a diagnosis we call the endomyocardial form of restrictive cardiomyopathy. Right. And the question is, how much of these structures can you have and be normal? And how much can you have and be regarded to be abnormal? Do you need to have circulatory changes, meaning left atrial enlargement and restrictive filling, or can you have it and still be, absence of circulatory changes and other echo findings, and still be regarded having the endomyocardial form of restrictive cardiomyopathy? That I find, because we really don't have any recommendations to draw the line.
I think that's super challenging, isn't it? Because we can't. How do you diagnose stage B1 RCM? I mean, it doesn't exist. It's not possible based on the consensus guidelines.
Yeah.
Do you biopsy? Well, what do you see on the histopath? You see myocyte hypertrophy, disarray, fibrosis, based on Phil Fox's paper from Circulation. So it's the same as HCM at that level, and that's really challenging, I think. To work with that.
I want to jump on this question straight away because this is an interesting one. So everyone likes
interesting question.
Everyone. Well, yeah, exactly. Everyone loves a cutoff, a magic number. So do you have a cutoff to diagnose HCM, or if you could share with us, how do you diagnose HCM? So if I would bring my Maine Coon to you today in Uppsala, how do you diagnose HCM? How would you diagnose HCM? What are your cutoffs? What's your thought process when you are scanning a cat?
First of all, I think I'm extremely common in the way I practice. I sometimes consider myself being more common than common.
A man of the people.
I am. I'm very pragmatic, and I'm also extremely common. Is that I think that if you would ask any veterinary cardiologist, if you can have one modality on your ecosystem, what would you choose? I would say that 99% would say, give me a 2D. Give me a 2D image. That's the way I work. I start with the subjective impression. Does this appear normal to me? And if it doesn't, then I try to focus on what might be the abnormality. And so for me, I think the subjective impression is extremely important. Then what I do is that I look for supportive findings. Does this cat, for instance, have systolic anterior motion? Is there left atrial enlargement? Is there asymmetric hypertrophy? Is it symmetric? How big does the left ventricle look like? Because I think a very common pitfall is pseudohypertrophy, is that the cat is for some reason hypovolemic, dehydrated for any other reasons. So there, I think is extremely important to pay attention to the loading condition of the heart. If the left ventricle is small, then you have to be careful with diagnosing, particularly hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, because it's easy to pay attention. It's easy to lose focus on that. So therefore, in a normally sized cat, there's a simple thing that if you have a cat that is just completely normal size, say that is about 3.5, 4 kilos, and you look at the depth of the image that you're having, a simple thing is that if you're down to 3.5 or 4 centimeters and you fill up the entire, you fill up the screen or the image or the sector that you're getting, that heart is probably not big. But if you have the depth on 5 or even 6 centimeters and it fills up equally size, then that heart is probably big in that particular cat. But then the last thing I do is to do measurements. And for me, measurements, I never diagnose a cat purely based on measurements. Measurements is there to support my subjective impression. And no, there isn't a magical number. I don't have a magical number. I look at the cat and I try to see a little bit on did I do the measurement? Is this reasonable? And once I see that the measurement is reasonable, then I look at what would be considered to be normal in a cat of this body size. And if it is around, as you are implying a little bit, that it's about 4 kilos. Then the upper normal reference, the prediction intervals we have is around 5 millimeters. And then comes the question, what do you do with a cat where you have 5.2? Well, then you have to take all the information you have. What was the quality of the exam you had? Did you get a good views? Was there a struggling cat? Poor quality of the exam? Can you look yourself in the mirror and say that I'm 100% sure that this cat has hypertrophic cardiomyopathy? And if you can't, you shouldn't classify that cat as HCM. So there's a gray zone, and we have to accept that there are limitations with the exam we're doing. The echo isn't the gold standard. So rather forcing people to go into one classification, saying that this is normal, when they find something that they think this is probably not normal, but I don't know, or saying this is definitely disease, then there is a safety event, so to say that I am not certain. I don't know exactly. I can't say healthy or disease. So the gray zone is there to ensure that you're not forcing someone into making a yes or no answer. So for me, measurement is not there isn't a magical number. And I think that the old way to classify them, saying that everything that is 6 millimeters or greater in a cat is just not really paying attention to the biology behind it. And because cats that are weighing up to 8, 9, maybe 10 kilos, 6 millimeters is a normal measurement in a cat. I mean, it's mostly relevant to big male Maine Coon cats and maybe Siberian cats and maybe Norwegian forest cats, but they're out there, and you're being extremely punishing to those cats. But if you say 6 millimeters to 2.5 kilo Burman cats, you're being extremely lenient and allowing. So you're probably underdiagnosing badly if you're using that cutoff for that particular cat. So in the context of breed screenings, our instructions for the screener is that if you are uncertain, say equivocal and explain for the owner that this does not mean that the cat is a little bit sick, or it just means that this is a limitation to the method we're using to screen the cats. And it's basically only to be considered as a recommendation to re-examine the cat after some time has passed. And that time should be more than a month or 3 months. It should preferably be up to maybe a half a year or a year or so.
And how much importance do you put on subjective factors like papillary muscle enlargement, end systolic cavity obliteration, things like that? Do you hold those as part of your subjective assessment?
Yes, they're part of the subjective impression. And as a matter of fact, they are part of the screen protocol also. So the screener has to make a subjective impression of how big are the papillary muscles in your opinion. What is the subjective size of the left atrium? Do you have evidence of systolic anterior motion? In that case, they're asked to measure maximum flow velocity. I'm not so sure that particular thing is something. Well, the presence of systolic anterior motion, at least to me, say that this cat should not be regarded as at least not normal. To me, it's an indication that maybe there is something going on in this cat. Maybe you can't say that it is hypertrophic, but it's clearly not the normal finding in a normal cat. So for me, if you don't see other evidence of HCM in that particular cat, re-examine it at a later time point. I can tell you when we tried to write up the ACVM consensus statement about feline cardiomyopathy, we had a very intense discussion when it came to how do you classify moderate to severe systolic anterior motion. From the beginning, the suggestion was that say 4.5 meters per second maximum velocity of the flow then. And yeah, but where did that come from? Well, that comes from the paper from Chris Lombard and Claudio Bussadori of recommendations to classify fixed subaortic stenosis and fixed pulmonic stenosis. Well, the problem with SAM is that it's not a consistent finding.
It's very different, isn't it?
I mean, it can be there when you examine the cat at one time point and be gone the next time. And that applies even more to the maximum flow velocity. That is, to me, extremely dependent on how excited the cat is. So if you measure a calm cat that might have a little bit of SAM, of course the flow velocity won't be that high. but stress the cat a little bit and maybe it comes up to 5, 6, 7 meters per second or something like that. And it's just a matter of physiology to me.
Imagine, Jens, if you have a cat with normal LV wall thickness and systolic anterior motion of the mitral valve, I guess we can call that case equivocal. But do you have any data, feeling of what is this? Is this a pre-phenotypic change? Cats with SAM and normal wall thickness, is that a pre-phenotype before they develop HCM? Do you see these cats, if you follow them over time, developing HCM? Or do you think this might be independent of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy?
I don't think we really have the data to say one way or the other. I think if I look in the database of the breed screening cats, almost all the cats that were diagnosed having systolic anterior motion, they had other abnormalities as well. So just having systolic anterior motion in a otherwise completely normal cats, I think it's, at least when you look at the screening data and what I see in where I work, is that it's comparably uncommon finding. This usually is something else also going on. Papillary muscles are not normal. I'm talking about the anterior posterior papillary muscle, or there is something going on causing the SAM. I know that, I mean, based on the study from Schober and co-worker discussing, which is also an interesting finding, that maybe SAM in some cats can be associated to some sort of mitral valve dysplasia causing the anterior leaflet to be elongated, that could have an impact. Maybe it is, but definitely not in all cats. Maybe in some cats, but definitely not in all cats, is my opinion. I don't have the data to say one way or the other. I think that saying when you have such a variable finding that SAM is in these early stages that we think are early stages of HCM, to say one way or the other is very difficult. The ones that don't have SAM might very well have systolic anterior next time you examine it. And the ones that have SAM might be gone next time you examine it. So it's a very variable finding. I don't really know what to do with it, to be honest, more than I consider it not to be a normal finding. If you think of it from the pathophysiological standpoint, is it bad to have left ventricular outflow tract obstruction? I think the story with subaortic stenosis in dogs tells us that if you have very mild stenosis, that might not affect long-term prognosis that much. Many of these dogs live a comparably normal life and bad things are unlikely to happen. But at some time point or some degree of obstruction, this becomes of prognostic of importance. And today we say it's some of the moderate and all of the severe ones. It has a negative impact on the outcome. And I think if I would guess, I would think it's probably the same thing in cats. Mild obstruction probably doesn't affect long-term prognosis in the cats, whereas the ones that have more obvious obstructions is probably something that leads to bad things in the long run.
It makes sense. Going back to some of the more fundamentals of screening, and I know in a minute we're going to talk about other non-echo methods of screening and if there's a role for those. But just to finish up thinking about echo, what age should we be thinking about beginning the screening process for HCM? And what's your protocol in terms of ages to be screened at? Is it simply annual screening if people will take you up on that? Or is it more like the Cavalier program where we have, through Copenhagen, screening at 1 year or 18 months, 3 years, 5 years for males?
What is recommended in the protocol, in the screening program, is that we recommend, first of all, you have to think that this is also service to the breeders. From the standpoint that very few cats at the age of 1 year have developed. There are some cats that will, but there are comparatively few, will have developed the phenotype of HCM. The breeder we do a service to the breeders to at least say that when they start breeding the cat, because they can't wait that long, super long with the cat, because you don't want to have a non-castrated cat at home. in the long run. You want to get the kittens out there, and after that castrate the cat. Otherwise, you have problems. So that's that's biology for you.
There's a practical side of that, isn't
There's
there?
a practical side. So you need to be able to tell them at least at that time point, the cat didn't belong to the small group of cats that have developed the phenotype at the earlier stage. Then we recommend annual screening up until the age of 3, and then another one at the age of 5. Now, if cats belong to a family with known relatives that have developed the phenotype, developed the disease, they are recommended to do screens at a later time point. Or if the breed if the line that they're breeding on is of a particular valuable breeding line, we really want to know a little bit what happens with the cat as it gets older. There are pros and cons of breed screening cats that are old, because once they start to become older than 8 to 10 years of age, all sorts of other things starts to happen in them. Age, we have not compared to the overall buck, but we have comparably large number of older cats that are being screened also, and you can see that age has an effect on the measurements we're measuring. Older cats tend to have a small left ventricular cavity, and they tend to have a slightly thicker walls. But we have the problem of hyperthyroidism, we have the problem of chronic kidney disease, we have the problem of all the other diseases that starts to pop up, and you end up in a situation, how much is this caused by another disease that is present, or how much is caused by age, and how much is actual true development of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. We did a follow-up study on cats that had been breed screened in the Scandinavian countries, and we followed up the owners of these cats and asked them, what happened to your cat? Do you know what it died from? Is it still alive, or is it dead? What did it die of, at what age? And we could see that using these recommendations, we were able to identify about 50% of the cats that at some time point in life died or become euthanized because of heart disease. So that tells us we can improve quite substantially where we are right now, but having these recommendations, at least we detect half of the cases. And so I think that was quite assuring, I would say, that at least we're doing something. And in the database, we can see that the proportion of cats that are echo positives has decreased from somewhere between 10 and 15% down to 1-2%.
That's impressive results of breeding programs, isn't it?
If we think about the general cat population, we have been focusing on breeders and so on. What would be your recommendation to a family cat? Which cases should we screen? Because HCM has such a high prevalence, 1 in 6, 7 cats. And sometimes I wonder, in one hand, if we should have an approach similar to Dobermans, where I guess every Dobie older than 3 or 4, we should recommend screening. But then, of course, there is a balance. You cannot echo every single cat you see in your practice. So where is the line? Where do you draw the line? If you see a client with a cat that is 3, 4, 5 years age, do you talk about HCM? Which case do you decide to screen?
Well, in the screening program, it is cats. They belong to families that are used for breeding, and because the generation intervals are comparably small, and some male cats can have quite substantial number of offsprings. If it's enough with a few popular cats to spread the bad genes in the population, and we will be back to square one again. So we recommend cats that belong to families that are being used for breeding to be screened, and in particular the ones that are used for breeding. They are the valuable cats because they get lots of offspring. Now then, you think that, well, one of the kittens, a number of kittens, they were sold to a private person who castrated the cats immediately. Do they matter? Well, they do matter in some way, because even though they don't propagate their genes anymore, they belong to this affected family or a family that has
Evidence,
been
aren't they?
affected. So they do matter. It's also a matter of cost, because somebody has to pay for the screens, and we do this breed screening as a comparably cheap exam. It's subsidized. We do it as a service for the breeders, and we think we've done an impact over the years, but still it is a cost involved with for the owners, and so of course you can't force them to come if they don't want to, and I mean the countries we are screening cats here, they are free countries, and you can't really force people by law to come. The whole thing otherwise is based on a voluntary basis, and I think that's the way to go, because even if you have ways to force people, there will always be ways around it if they don't want to come. It's as much as that. So I'd rather go the voluntary way rather than forcing people.
At least then they might come back and be seen again, which is contributing to our understanding of what's happening.
Yeah.
Do you think, in terms of mass screening of individuals, do you think there is a role for cardiac biomarkers?
What I've seen so far is that the sensitivity and specificity of the biomarkers is not good enough for breed screening, at least. When it comes to pre-anesthetic screening, I think that's a different story, because then we are interested in cats, to identify cats where there's a particular that it could be a danger of actually anesthetizing them. I think that is a different story. We have a different aim with the exam.
Your question's different.
When we breed screened. So at present date, I don't think that the sensitivity and specificity is good enough for the biomarkers. But I think for pre-anesthetic purposes, the situation is different.
You have done also a lot of work on genetics, Jens, on both cats and dogs. But thinking about genotyping cats when you assess them, do you recommend genotyping every Maine Coon and Ragdoll cat you see, or how do you approach Ragdolls and Maine Coons during your screening programs?
We recommend that if they breed cats, that in those particular breeds, that they actually do genetic testing, and as long as they have control of the breeding animals, so they're not having some male coming in and mating with the female, so the lineage is uncertain. Then what happens with time is that they know that this female is gene negative for the known variants that are supposedly causative for the disease, and that means that they don't have to continue to test forever, because if they know exactly which animals they're breeding on, and they know the genotype of these breeding animals, then they do not need to test every cat that comes after. They know exactly, if they are negative. The problem comes up then, what do you do with a cat that is heterozygous, so to say, for one of the mutations? Yeah. Well, the recommendation we have so far is that if the cat is not super important, don't breed on it. But if the cat is valuable for some reason, then you should mate it to a cat that is gene negative for the known variants, and then test the offspring, and then continue the breeding with the ones that are gene negative, because there will be a proportion of those cats that are gene negative for the known variant. So I think that's how we approach it. And should every cat does this replace echo? In my opinion, no. And I think that the current knowledge we have today is that I think it's to oversimplify things to say that, we have the mutation. I mean, when we started this work 20 years ago, we were looking for the gene that causes feline cardiomyopathy. And, we now know that that's naive. It is much, 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 much more complicated than that. we are talking now about many different gene variants that has the potential of causing the HCM phenotype and the restrictive phenotype. And we're not going to end up with the gene. We're going to end up with many different genes. Even in a breed like the Maine Coon cat or the Ragdoll cats, where we have, comparably reliable gene tests for those gene variants that are causative then for the disease, there's still room for other mutations to cause that phenotype, and these cats will of course be negative for the disease causing variant, and they can still have hypertrophic cardiomyopathy because of some other mutation somewhere. So it doesn't replace echo screening. The proportion of gene positive cats has actually dropped quite substantially, both in the Ragdoll and the Maine Coon cats. I've seen data from commercial labs, and it's the prevalence of gene positive cats drops for every year.
That's super interesting, isn't it? And it suggests the breeders are making some informed choices, doesn't it, behind the scenes, that they're just getting on with that. That's great. I guess the risk is narrowing the gene pool too much, but it sounds like there is a way to navigate that, doesn't it? Thinking just about echo, we've talked about what we do now. Are there any new echo techniques, for example, speckle tracking based techniques or real-time 3D echo that could be used in the future when this is a bit more accessible, a bit better defined, to give us more accuracy in our screening? Or will 2D echo be the king of screening for HCM?
From what I've seen so far is that these more modern or newer techniques, they, considering what you see when you look at simple standard measurements, is that I have a hard time seeing that speckle tracking and TDI is something that will replace the standard measurements. I mean, you look at comparably simple measurements and you will still have the problem with using these methods in the hands of many. Most of the studies we have when it comes to TDI and speckle tracking is they are made in one place where people, they practice the same way, they do it the same way, they have the same ecosystems. And to make this work in the hands of hundreds or thousands of people, I don't really see we are there yet. Maybe in the future, but we're not there yet. What I can envision in the future is that, with improved technology and the 3D technology and AI coming in with better automatic border tracking coming in, is that I can envision 3D techniques coming in the future, and then I can envision a situation where we can actually estimate volumes and estimate cardiac mass, overall cardiac mass, using the 3D echo. But with the current technology we have, we're not nearly there yet. We have tested the current 3D echo capacity, and you can do reasonable exams in big Maine Coon cats. But as soon as you start coming down to a 4-kilo cat, something like that, the frame rate you have is way too slow. And the resolution of the image, because the frame rate is low, the resolution is also comparably low. And the border tracking algorithms they have are not good enough, I think. That technique is not there yet. Maybe in the future. And with that, of course, and also there might be some speckle tracking technology that will develop that comes together with the 3D technology, then that way you can look at more regional how the myocardium is moving and so on and so forth. But the technology is not there yet, and the current technology we have, I think that the variation we see between different observer and the variation we see, if we're going to apply this in the hands of many, we're not there yet. Maybe in the future, but not yet. I like to keep things simple, as if we have a problem making the simple things work, how much problem we're going to have the more complicated things to work in the hands of many. I mean, you brought up the question, what do we do with the problem with the ectopic papillary muscles in the left ventricular outflow tract? They're still going to be there, even if you apply these more advanced echo techniques. What do we do with those? What do we do?
Yeah, there are more fundamental questions, aren't there?
I mean, there are more fundamental questions. Just as an ending, just want to say that when it comes to the feline cardiomyopathy, even specialists do not sit on the truth many times. There's a lot of opinions going around, and opinions of experts, when you haven't really corroborated with some sort of scientific evidence, will still be opinions.
The lowest form of evidence.
Yeah, that's the way it is, and the more complicated things are, the more opinions there are, and that's certainly true for when it comes to the feline cardiomyopathy field, which is at the same time which makes this exciting and interesting.
It's very thought-provoking,
Exactly.
isn't it? And it's always super interesting to hear what different people think. And it's one of the things that we found a big privilege about, doing a podcast like this, is that we get to talk to people about things that we just would never have these conversations normally. And it's fantastic to really drill down into these niches and see where different people are at and what they think. So thank you very much for your time. Super, super appreciated.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
It's been a joy. We normally ask our guests to sum up with their top 3 take-home messages for listeners. Now, we've talked about a lot of different things, but if you've got top 3 messages for people, then please feel free to share them.
When it comes to echoing cats, please pay attention to ectopic papillary muscles and false tendons. And remember that they are a major source of variation we see in the measurements. And there's confusion, in my opinion, and I don't think you should include them in your measurements. And also, rely on the subjective impression you have of the heart. The subjective impression is important, and measurements, we don't diagnose disease with measurements. We use them to substantiate our subjective impression. And then it comes to number 3. That's a tricky
the hardest one, number 3.
Remember that cats, even though they are a comparably narrow weight range or body size range, they are still mammals, and body size does matter in cats. And the thing is that the question we brought up earlier was that, does it matter in the range of that we typically see cats? Well, the thing is that the small impact you have of body weight matters when you get measurements that are close enough to what you consider the upper normal limit. So therefore, I think that's one take home. If you're in the middle, then you don't have to worry so much. But if you are close to the upper border, what is considered normal, then you should pay attention to body size.
Yeah, that makes
I'm going to add
sense.
a fourth take-home message, which is the term false tendon is now officially banned, and we're moving forward with left ventricular band.
Thank you so much, Kieran. That's good news.
The campaign started.
That's right. Remember, there are myocytes in them.
Excellent.
Brilliant, Jens. Thanks very much. It was great talking to you, and this was a great overview on screening feline HCM. Thanks a lot, and have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jens. Jose, could you just quickly say something about our social media? Just say, please follow us on socials, and remember to check out the episodes.
Absolutely.
No, I'm not a social media person.
Oh no, not you. It's all right. If Jose can do it, just
no, I can say something, but tell me.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. You want to advertise the socials? Let's do it.
Yeah. If you want me to say something, I do it. I just I don't know what to say.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So this is a first time a guest has advertised the social.
Okay. So please follow us on Animal Heartbeat.
Fantastic. On Twitter or X and Instagram, it's @heartbeat_pod. Thanks, Jens.
I'm a social media black spot. I don't have Facebook. I don't have Instagram. I don't have Twitter. I don't have anything. And to be honest, I can read a book instead.
Great.
Yeah. All right.
And thanks everybody for listening.